On my 70th birthday, my daughter smiled and placed a steaming plate of pasta in front of me. I made it exactly the way Mom did. Eat, Dad. As I lifted my fork, something felt terribly wrong. Without saying a word, I calmly slid the plate toward my son-in-law. My daughter's smile vanished for 1 second. He took a bite without hesitation. 30 minutes later, the restaurant erupted into chaos, and I realized I had been the intended victim all along. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a comment. What's the weather like where you are? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Quick note, certain details have been adapted for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. The lesson is what matters most. Sitting here in the summer of 2026, looking back at my 70th birthday 3 years ago, in July 2023, I still remember sitting in my kitchen, drinking morning coffee alone, a ritual I'd kept since my wife passed. Looking out at the garden and thinking about the one thing I'd learned after 35 years fixing broken heating systems. When something runs too quietly, that's when you should worry. The house around me was the same one Eleanor and I bought in December 1993. The floorboards in the northeast corner squeaked had for a decade ever since I'd replaced the subflooring after a pipe leak. The heating ducts hummed at a frequency I could identify in my sleep, a C-sharp with a slight vibration that meant I'd need to tighten the bracket near the furnace by October. The garage still held 40 years of tools my wife used to call the museum, organized by size and function, in a way that made perfect sense to me and no sense to anyone else. I'd retired 3 years ago at 67, later than most, because I liked the work, and because staying busy kept me from thinking too much about Eleanor's empty chair at the kitchen table. This morning on my 70th birthday, I felt something unexpected possibility. Not the kind you feel at 20, but the kind you feel when you've survived enough disasters to trust your own instincts. My daughter Corinne, 42 years old, and always impeccably put together, had called yesterday to confirm tonight's reservation at Famiglia Ristorante Italiano, the place we'd been going to since she was 8. She'd been calling regularly since her mother died, the kind of daughter everyone said I was lucky to have, with a smile that looked exactly like Eleanor's used to. "I'll bring Donovan and Freya," she'd said. 7 o'clock. "Don't you dare cook for yourself tonight, Dad." I'd laughed and promised I wouldn't. That was yesterday. This morning, drinking my coffee and watching July sunlight filter through the kitchen window, I thought about how much of my life had been spent reading things other people couldn't see. Airflow patterns in ductwork, pressure differentials in refrigerant lines, the way a compressor sounds 3 days before it fails. You think at 70, all the big moments are behind you. Retirements, funerals, the last time you fixed something with your own hands. I thought so too. I was wrong. That evening, at Famiglia Ristorante Italiano, I sat in our usual corner booth, running my thumb along the worn laminate table, remembering when Corinne had spilled grape juice here at age 9 and cried because she thought the restaurant would ban us. The owner had laughed and brought her gelato. He was gone now, his son ran the place, but the booth was the same. Corinne arrived at 7 exactly. Donovan Prescott, my son-in-law of 14 years, and a real estate broker, who always seemed to carry money, problems in his shoulders, trailed behind her and sat down across from me without meeting my eyes. Something I noticed immediately, the way you notice when a compressor starts running half a decibel too quiet. Freya, my 12-year-old granddaughter with her mother's sharp features, but none of her practiced charm, slid in beside me. She was the kind of child who noticed more than adults wanted her to, her eyes flicking between her mother and the thermal bag Corinne was carrying, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Happy birthday, Dad," Corinne said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. She smelled like expensive perfume Donovan probably couldn't afford. 70 years young. Just 70, I said. Let's not pretend. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. I cataloged that detail the way I'd catalog a loose wire worth noting, maybe nothing, maybe everything. The waiter came and went. Donovan ordered wine he didn't drink. Freya picked at her breadstick. Corinne made conversation about the weather, about Freya's school year, about my garden. Everything normal. Everything smooth. Too smooth. Then Corinne reached into the thermal bag and pulled out a covered dish. I made something special, she said. Your favorite. The pasta Mom used to make every year for your birthday. Her recipe, the one she'd mix by hand. I stared at the container. Eleanor's pasta. The recipe she'd learned from her own mother, the one that took 3 hours because she insisted on rolling it by hand. You didn't have to go to all this trouble, sweetheart, I said. It's not trouble. Corinne opened the container, and the smell of fresh pasta and butter and herbs filled the space between us. You deserve something special tonight. She plated it carefully, using the restaurant's white ceramic dish, arranging it with precision. Donovan watched his wine glass. Freya watched her mother with that strange, unreadable expression. If you've ever worked with your hands for 35 years, you know your body learns things your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Your fingers know when a bolt is stripped before you consciously register it. Your ears hear the frequency shift in a motor before you understand what it means. Your gut recognizes danger before your mind can name it. Corinne set the plate down in front of me, not like a daughter serving her father, like someone placing the final piece in a mechanism. She didn't look away. Her eyes stayed on mine with an intensity that wasn't maternal care, wasn't birthday celebration, wasn't anything I recognized from 42 years of knowing my own child. It was watchful. Waiting. Donovan still wouldn't meet my eyes. Freya's hand had gone still on her breadstick. I picked up my fork. Every system gives signals before it fails. A furnace running too smoothly before the heat exchanger cracks. A compressor running too quietly before the motor seizes. 35 years had taught me to trust those signals even when I couldn't explain them, even when everything looked fine on the surface. Everything looked fine. My daughter had made me birthday pasta using her dead mother's recipe. My son-in-law was having a bad day. My granddaughter was being 12. But something in the way Corinne watched me, in the way Donovan wouldn't look at me, in the way Freya's eyes kept darting to that thermal bag and back to her mother, screamed the same warning I'd learned to trust in basements and crawl spaces and mechanical rooms. This system was about to fail. I just didn't know how yet. 35 years as an HVAC mechanic taught me one thing: when a system runs too smoothly, too perfectly, on time, it usually means someone wired something dangerous into it. Right then, watching my daughter watch me lift my fork toward that perfect plate of homemade pasta, every diagnostic instinct I'd ever trusted started screaming. I'd spent 3.5 decades reading systems other people couldn't see. You learn to diagnose by feel, by sound, by the way air moves through ductwork in the dark. You learn to trust your gut when it tells you something is wrong, even when every gauge says everything's fine. And sitting in that restaurant booth with my fork halfway to the pasta, my gut was screaming louder than any alarm I'd ever heard. Corinne wasn't looking at me the way a daughter looks at her father on his birthday. She was looking at me the way a technician watches a pressure gauge waiting for a specific reading. Her shoulders were tight. Her smile was too practiced, too controlled. She hadn't blinked in 40 seconds I'd counted the way you count the interval between a compressor cycling on and off. Donovan still wouldn't meet my eyes. His wine glass sat full in front of him, condensation running down the stem. He'd ordered it 20 minutes ago and hadn't touched it. That wasn't like him. Donovan liked wine. Donovan always had a story about the vineyard or the vintage. Tonight he sat silent, watching his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Freya had gone completely still beside me, her breadstick abandoned halfway through. She was 12 years old enough to read a room, and the way she kept glancing between her mother and that thermal bag told me she'd already read this one. She knew something. Maybe not what, but something. The pasta sat in front of me, perfectly plated. The butter had been warmed to exactly the right temperature, so it pooled around the ribbons without congealing. The herbs were fresh cut, arranged with precision. Eleanor's recipe, made by Corinne's hands, brought from home in a thermal container to keep it at the exact right serving temperature. Too perfect, too smooth, too deliberately timed. I'd been diagnosing faulty systems since 1985. Furnaces that ran too quietly before the heat exchanger cracked. Compressors that cycled too smoothly before the motor seized. Air handlers that operated perfectly right up until the moment they flooded the basement. Every catastrophic failure I'd ever seen started with a system running too well, masking the critical malfunction underneath. This felt exactly like that. If you've ever worked with your hands for 35 years, really worked diagnosing invisible problems inside walls in the dark, you know this feeling, your body screaming danger at you seconds before your brain catches up with the reason why. Your fingers registering the wrong temperature on a pipe before you consciously understand what that means. Your ears catching the frequency shift in a motor before you can name the mechanical problem causing it. I set my fork down. Corinne's eyes tracked the movement. Just a flicker, but I saw it. The same way you see a pressure gauge needle jump when a system's about to blow. "Donovan," I said, and my voice came out casual, easy, like I'd just thought of something. "Try some first. I feel a bit full from lunch, but I want to know if it really tastes like your mother-in-law's recipe used to. Tell me if Corinne got it right." I pushed the plate across the table toward him. For exactly 1 second, Corinne froze. Not the way you freeze when someone makes an unexpected request. The way a system freezes is when you interrupt its carefully timed sequence. The way a programmed thermostat pauses when you override it manually. Her face went blank, not surprised, not confused, just stopped. Like I'd pulled a plug she hadn't expected anyone to touch. 1 second. That's all it lasted. Then her smile snapped back into place, smooth as flipping a switch. "Of course, Dad," she said, and her voice was warm, perfect, practiced. Donovan should definitely try it. He loved Mom's pasta, but I'd seen that second. That frozen moment when her mechanism got interrupted. Donovan looked at the plate in front of him, like it had materialized from thin air. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his fork, just a tremor barely visible, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. "Sure," he said quietly. "Yeah, I can." It was like watching a furnace about to blow. That one frozen second before the pressure valve fails when the whole system holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion or the miraculous release. The moment where everything could still go either way, where the laws of physics and the quality of the engineering meet in a single point of catastrophic stress. I watched Donovan pick up the fork. Corinne watched me. Freya watched her mother. The restaurant noise continued around us. Jazz from the speakers, silverware clinking against plates, conversations at other tables about ordinary things like vacation plans and mortgage rates. The world was normal. Everything was fine. A family celebrating a 70th birthday at their regular Italian place, the dutiful daughter who'd made her father's favorite pasta, the quiet son-in-law about to taste it first. Except my diagnostic instinct, the one that had kept me alive in crawl spaces and attics and mechanical rooms for 35 years, the one that had never once been wrong about a system about to fail, was screaming that I'd just saved my own life and condemned someone else. Donovan twirled the pasta onto his fork. The butter caught the light. The herbs smelled like Eleanor's kitchen on Sunday afternoons, when she'd spend 3 hours making everything by hand, when Corinne was still small enough to stand on a stool beside her mother and help measure the flour. I looked away. Casual, unbothered. Just a father who felt too full for pasta, asking his son-in-law's opinion first. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Dear God, I thought, watching Donovan lift the fork toward his mouth. I hope I'm wrong. Because if I was right, if my instinct was reading this correctly, if that 1-second freeze meant what I thought it meant, if this perfect pasta had been wired with something dangerous, the way someone wires a faulty thermostat into a system, then I'd just watched my own daughter try to kill me. And the man lifting that fork to his lips had no idea what I'd done to save myself. The jazz played. Corinne smiled. Freya looked down at her plate. Donovan ate the pasta. 30 minutes later, I would learn exactly how right I was. 30 minutes later, Donovan set down his water glass with a hand that trembled just slightly, the kind of tremor I'd seen in pressure gauges right before a system failed completely, and I knew with sick certainty that I hadn't been wrong at all. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thin. "I feel a bit off, dizzy." His face had gone pale color, draining like someone had opened a valve inside him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "Must be coming down with something," Donovan continued, pushing his chair back. "Maybe I should get some air." Corinne's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Not gentle concern. The firm grip of someone keeping a pressure valve sealed. Don't stand up yet," she said. "Let me get Iris. She's right over there." I'd forgotten about Dr. Iris Vaughn, a physician in her mid-50s, whom Corinne had introduced earlier as a friend from the hospital auxiliary board, invited to my birthday dinner with perfect poisonous coincidence. She'd been sitting 3 tables away, close enough to call over, far enough to seem uninvolved. Dr. Vaughn came immediately, medical bag already in hand, like she'd been waiting. "Donovan's feeling unwell," Corinne said, her voice pitched exactly right, concerned, but not panicked. "Can you take a look?" Dr. Vaughn checked his pulse, his pupils asked about symptoms. Donovan answered in fragments. Nausea, dizziness getting worse, heart racing but also feeling slow somehow. I watched Corinne watch Donovan, and I saw her eyes flick to the empty pasta plate. Then to Dr. Vaughn, then back to the plate. "Did he eat all of the pasta?" Corinne asked. "All of it." Not, "Is he going to be okay?" Not, "What's wrong?" Not, "Should we call an ambulance?" Did he eat all of the pasta? Like a technician checking dosage. Like someone who needed to know the exact quantity ingested to calculate the expected outcome. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Dr. Vaughn looked up, frowning. "Yes, I think so. Why does that—" "Yes, we need an ambulance," I said, cutting her off. "Now." Freya had started crying, clinging to Donovan's arm. "Daddy, what's happening? Grandpa, what's wrong with Daddy?" I pulled her against me, feeling her shake. Over her head, I watched Corinne's face, searching for something: fear, guilt, surprise, anything human. She was perfectly composed, perfectly concerned, perfectly performing the role of a dutiful daughter whose father's birthday dinner had gone terribly wrong. They say you never really know your own children, that they grow up and become strangers wearing familiar faces. I thought I knew my daughter. I thought 35 years of reading broken systems had taught me to spot danger. I was wrong on both counts. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Paramedics loaded Donovan onto a stretcher while he apologized to the restaurant staff, his words slurring. Corinne rode with him. Dr. Vaughn followed in her car. I drove Freya in mine, her silence louder than any siren. Providence Portland Medical Center's emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fear. They took Donovan back immediately. We waited in the ICU family area, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights humming. Dr. Helena Marsh, the emergency room physician in her early 40s with tired, competent eyes, delivered the diagnosis with the kind of calm that comes from seeing too many poisonings to be shocked anymore. "Now he's stable," she said, looking at Corinne. "Digoxin toxicity moderate level. We've started IV fluids and monitoring." Does he take any heart medications? Blood thinners? No, Corinne said immediately. Nothing like that. He's healthy. How could this happen? Her performance was flawless. The perfect pitch of confusion, concern, maternal worry. If I hadn't heard her ask about the pasta quantity, if I hadn't seen that 1 second freeze when I'd moved the plate, I would have believed her completely. We need to find the source, Dr. Marsh said. Digoxin doesn't just appear in someone's system. Did he eat anything unusual today? Just dinner, Corinne said. My father's birthday. I made pasta at home, brought it to the restaurant. She didn't even hesitate. Offered the information like it was innocent, irrelevant. Dr. Marsh made a note. We'll need to analyze what he ate. Do you have any left? No, Corinne said. He finished it. I only brought 1 serving and Donovan ate it instead because Dad was full. Smooth. Rehearsed. Like she'd already written this script. I need to step outside, Corinne said suddenly. I need to call my sister. Someone needs to watch Freya tonight while I stay here with Donovan. She walked out into the hallway. Through the glass partition, I watched her pull out her phone. Freya's hand tightened on mine. I looked down. She was watching her mother through the glass, her young face older than it should have been. Grandpa, Freya whispered. I don't have an aunt. Watching Corinne through that hospital glass was like watching a heating system I'd installed myself turn lethal, something I'd built with my own hands, maintained for decades, now leaking carbon monoxide into air I had to breathe. Corinne talked for 2 minutes, gestured with her free hand, nodded at whatever response she was getting, then hung up and came back inside her face arranged in worry and relief. My sister will come get Freya in an hour, she said. Freya's small hand stayed on mine, warm, steady, trusting, while we both watched my daughter settle back into her chair and check her phone. The girl said nothing, didn't ask questions, didn't call out the lie. At 12 years old, she'd just learned the same terrible lesson I had. Sometimes the people who smile the warmest have the coldest plans underneath. And I thought, if she knows, how long has she been knowing? But there was something else I needed to know, and it was waiting for me at home. I drove home at 11:30 p.m. while Corinne stayed at the hospital, playing the worried daughter. And the first thing I did, the only thing that mattered, was check the bedroom safe. Because when you suspect a system breach in any complex mechanism, you always check the central control point first. The safe sat in the back of my closet behind Eleanor's winter coats. I spun the combination with steady hands. The door swung open with its familiar click. My house title deed was missing. In its place sat a typed document on legal paper, crisp and new, dated April 15th, 2023. Last will and testament. My name at the top. Corinne's name as sole beneficiary. Professional legal language. My signature at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature, not quite. I carried the document to the bedside lamp and held it under the light the way I'd hold a wiring diagram looking for the flaw I knew had to be there. The signature looked right at first glance. The L and B connected properly. The loop matched my natural motion. Even the slant was correct, that 45-degree angle I'd developed over 50 years. But it was too perfect. I've signed my name 10,000 times. Every signature carries the same small imperfection, a slight shake at the end of the D, where my left hand doesn't quite finish smoothly. It's been there since 2018 when a pipe wrench caught wrong and crushed 2 tendons in my palm. I barely notice it when I write. But it's always there. This signature didn't shake. Whoever forged it didn't know about the wrench. Didn't know about the tendons. Didn't know that my body had been changed by the same work that taught me to spot changes in other systems. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the forged will. April 15, 2023, 3 months before my birthday. 3 months of planning, document creation, whatever mechanism she'd built to make this look legitimate. Maybe longer. How much time does it take to decide to kill your own father? How long does it take to stop knowing your own child? How many small lies, small betrayals, small coldnesses build up in the walls before you realize the person you raised turned into someone else entirely, someone capable of this? I thought about Corinne at 8 crying over spilled grape juice. Corinne at 16 bringing me coffee in the garage. Corinne at 24 calling from her wedding to say she loved me. Somewhere between 24 and 42, that person had died. Or maybe she'd never existed at all. I checked the rest of the safe. Birth certificate, Eleanor's jewelry, passport, social security card, all present. Just the house deed missing. The one document that proved I owned the property free and clear after 30 years of payments. The one piece of paper that would complicate her inheritance if I died without a will. She'd thought of everything, almost everything. I didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m. on July 16th, I went to my home office and opened the laptop connected to the security camera system I'd installed 5 years ago. The footage from the past week had been deleted. Clean wipe. But 35 years working with electronics taught me one thing. Deleted doesn't mean lost. It means the system stopped pointing at it. The data's still there waiting for someone who knows how to look. I'd installed data recovery software 2 years ago after Eleanor accidentally deleted our anniversary photos. Never uninstalled it. The recovery took 40 minutes. The software scanned sector by sector, pulling back fragments of deleted files, reconstructing video streams from residual data. July 1st, 11 days before my birthday. 4 minutes and 32 seconds of footage. Corinne letting herself in with the spare key. Walking through the house like she owned it. Going straight to the bathroom. Opening the medicine cabinet. Taking the orange prescription bottle with my name on the label. My digoxin. The medication I'd taken every morning for 6 years to keep my heart rhythm steady. 30 milligrams daily. Prescription renewed monthly. The pills I trusted to keep me alive. She opened the bottle, counted out pills, poured them into a small plastic bag, used the bottom of a coffee mug to crush them into white powder. 4 minutes and 32 seconds. Then she left, locking the door behind her, taking the powdered medication that would stop my heart if ingested in sufficient quantity. You spend 35 years building systems to keep people safe, warm in winter, cool in summer, clean air flowing through their homes. You learn to think about protecting life, maintaining comfort, ensuring survival. Every wire you run, every duct you install exists to make someone's world safer. And then you watch your own daughter repurpose the medication, keeping your heart beating into the weapon meant to stop it forever. The perfect crime. Old man with heart condition dies from his own medication. Natural causes. Maybe he got confused, took too many pills. The coroner would run a tox screen, find digoxin exactly what was supposed to be there. Case closed. No investigation needed. Just a sad story about an elderly man whose heart gave out on his 70th birthday. Except she'd made one critical mistake. She'd stolen from a mechanic who never throws anything away and who knows exactly how to recover evidence from deleted files. I watched the video one more time. My daughter's hand reaching into my medicine cabinet. The orange bottle with my name on the pharmacy label. The methodical crushing of pills that were supposed to keep me alive. The careful collection of white powder into a bag she'd carry home and mix into pasta dough made with her dead mother's recipe. I saved the recovered footage to 3 separate USB drives, labeled them with date and content, put 2 in the safe and 1 in my truck's glove compartment. Now I just needed to build a case she couldn't talk her way out of. 4 days later, I sat at my home office desk, with evidence spread before me like component parts of a catastrophically failed heating system. And I did what any good mechanic does when faced with sabotage. I diagnosed every piece, documented every failure point before calling anyone for help. 3 USB drives with recovered security footage labeled with date and content. The forged will sealed in a plastic evidence bag. A medication log showing exactly 6 missing digoxin pills. A handwritten timeline documenting every date, every observation, every system failure point. When you find a system broken, you don't call the landlord immediately. You diagnose everything first. Because if you miss a detail, everything gets patched over before you can prove deliberate sabotage. I needed legal advice. Someone to review the forged will confirm my suspicions about signature analysis. I'd used the same attorney for 15 years, Sterling Ashford. Trustworthy, professional, safe. Sterling Ashford. The attorney who'd handled my estate paperwork for 15 years, with his perfectly pressed suits and reassuring voice, called back within an hour and immediately started asking questions about my memory, my health, my future care planning, questions that had nothing to do with the simple will review I'd requested. Lowell. "How have you been feeling lately?" Sterling asked, that careful cadence lawyers use when building a case. "Any memory concerns, forgetting appointments? At our age, we need to think seriously about estate planning, cognitive evaluations, powers of attorney." I held the phone, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "I feel fine," I said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Just standard protocol for clients over 70, Sterling said smoothly. "We want to make sure any documents we prepare will hold up to scrutiny. Sometimes family members challenge wills on competency grounds." I hadn't mentioned my age, hadn't mentioned cognition, hadn't mentioned anything except wanting to review my existing will. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thanks for calling back." I hung up and stared at the forged will. I'd trusted this man for 15 years. Why was he asking about my mental state unless someone else had already asked him to? The conspiracy didn't stop with Corinne. If you've ever built something with your own hands, really built it piece by piece, payment by payment across 30 years, you know this specific rage watching someone try to dismantle it with forged paperwork while you're the only one who knows where all the supporting bolts are hidden. I couldn't trust my lawyer, couldn't trust the legal system, couldn't trust the people I'd invited to my birthday dinner. But I could trust evidence. I could trust documentation. I could trust the diagnostic skills that had kept me employed for 35 years. I just needed more evidence. On July 20th, I drove to Donovan and Corinne's house while Corinne was visiting her hospitalized husband. Freya answered the door, her face lighting up before going cautious. "Is Mom here?" I asked. "Hospital," Freya said. "Visiting Dad." "Can I come in?" She nodded, then grabbed my hand and pulled me upstairs to her bedroom. Closed the door. Locked it. "Grandpa," she whispered, pulling something from her backpack. "I need to show you something. Promise you won't tell Mom I gave it to you. Promise." She held out a purple USB drive, the cheap kind kids use for school homework, covered in butterfly stickers. "I saw her printing papers last week." Freya said, words tumbling out fast. "The computer was still open. I saw your name, your house address. It scared me. So I copied everything to my school USB. Mom doesn't know." My hands shook as I took the drive. "What kind of papers?" I asked. "Legal stuff. Numbers. A company name. Something about January." I plugged the USB into her laptop. One folder. 12 files. The first document made my vision narrow. Real estate purchase agreement. Corinne Blanchard selling priority purchase rights for the property at my address. Buyer Portland Development Corporation. Purchase price $1.5 million. Contingent clause. Transfer of ownership rights effective after property ownership legally transferred to seller completion, required before January 1, 2024. Attached was a secondary promissory note. She had borrowed $85,000 at high interest from an illegal lender to cover upfront bribes, attorney fees, and the fake medical evaluations needed to secure the guardianship before the January deadline. 2 months before my birthday party. 2 months before the poisoned pasta. She'd sold my house before she'd tried to kill me. Grandpa. Freya's voice was small. I don't think this is right. It's your house. Mom shouldn't be selling it. Should she? I looked at my granddaughter. 12 years old. The same age Corinne had been when I taught her to ride a bike to trust me to catch her when she fell. Now Corinne's daughter was trusting me to catch her mother in something far worse. No, I said quietly. She shouldn't be. I pulled Freya into a hug. She was shaking. She'd been carrying this alone, this knowledge that her mother was doing something wrong. This fear that telling would betray her family. This terrible burden of being 12 and understanding more than any child should. You did the right thing, I whispered. I'm going to fix this. Will Mom go to jail? Freya asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. Later, sitting in my truck in their driveway, I read the contract date again, May 15th, 2023, 2 months before my birthday. The timeline had been backwards in my head until that moment. I'd thought the murder was the plan. It wasn't. The murder was the deadline enforcement. She'd sold the property before trying to kill me. Already spent the money had to have, or why sign a contract with a January deadline already promised buyers? Already committed to a date. January 1st, 2024. And I was the only obstacle standing between her and that legally binding transfer date. The only component preventing the mechanism from completing its cycle. The poisoned pasta wasn't a plan. It was cleanup, deadline management. Removing the one piece blocking the system. I held the purple USB drive and thought about Sterling Ashford's questions. Cognitive evaluation, memory concerns, estate planning. If the murder failed, she had another plan, and it involved making everyone believe I wasn't competent to own property anymore. 1 week after finding the contract, I walked into Sterling Ashford's downtown office expecting routine legal advice about updating my will and walked out understanding exactly how deep the conspiracy reached, not just into my family, but into every system built to protect people like me. Sterling's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of place with leather chairs and law degrees framed on mahogany walls. I'd been coming here for 15 years. Trusted this man with my estate planning, with Eleanor's will, after she died, with every legal document that mattered. He didn't look surprised to see me. That was the first sign. Lowell, he said, shaking my hand with practiced warmth. Good to see you. Come in, sit down. We made small talk for 3 minutes. Weather, the Blazers, how Donovan was recovering, all performance, all stalling. Then I mentioned reviewing my current will, maybe making changes. Sterling's expression shifted, not surprise, but something rehearsed, clicking into place. Lowell, I need to be frank, he said, folding his hands on the desk between us. A petition's been filed in probate court. Concerns about your cognitive state, your ability to manage assets independently. I can't ethically sign new documents without proper evaluation first. It's for your protection. The office air conditioning hummed. Outside, traffic moved 14 floors below. Everything normal, everything wrong. Who filed this petition? I asked. When you're my attorney, why wasn't I notified immediately? Sterling's eyes didn't quite meet mine. I can't discuss court filing details at this stage. Attorney-client privilege complicates things when family members are involved. But as your attorney, I'm advising that evaluation is necessary. At our age, we all face these questions eventually. He'd known. Before I walked in. Before I'd called for the appointment. He'd known about the petition, was expecting this conversation, had prepared these exact words. The petition had been filed before my appointment, which meant Sterling knew in advance. Wasn't surprised. Was possibly coordinating timing. My attorney. 15 years of trust. Now actively participating in my daughter's conspiracy. I see, I said quietly. Thank you for your time. I stood. Sterling stood. We shook hands like civilized men, like nothing had just broken between us. I rode the elevator down 14 floors, thinking about systems, about the pipes hidden inside walls, the wiring behind drywall, the infrastructure people trust without seeing, about what happens when that infrastructure gets corrupted from the inside. Who do you call when the people paid to protect you have been bought? When the attorney meant to safeguard your interests is coordinating your exploitation? When the system designed to protect the elderly becomes the weapon used to dismantle them? I drove home and waited. 3 days later, in early August, Corinne's media campaign launched. It started with a local news interview human interest story about caring for aging parents. Corinne in her living room, looking tired but determined, talking about the challenges of watching a parent decline. It's heartbreaking, she told the camera voice, breaking in exactly the right places. Dad's always been so sharp, so independent, but lately forgetting appointments, confusion about finances, paranoid accusations about family. We just want him safe. The Facebook post went viral by that evening. Hundreds of likes, dozens of shares. Neighbors I barely knew commenting with sympathy with their own stories about aging parents with recommendations for memory care facilities. Attached to the post was a document. Official letterhead. Medical terminology. My name at the top. Cognitive evaluation report. Patient Lowell Blanchard. Date July 28, 2023. Patient exhibits early-stage cognitive impairment consistent with age-related decline. Notable difficulty with complex financial decisions. Short-term memory deficits. Episodes of confusion regarding recent events. Recommendation: immediate guardianship evaluation for asset protection and personal safety. Patient requires supervised living environment to prevent self-harm through poor decision-making. Signed, Dr. Quentin Hartwell, licensed psychologist. Dr. Quentin Hartwell's name appeared on official-looking letterhead, declaring me cognitively impaired and requiring guardianship. A 48-year-old licensed psychologist I'd never met, never been examined by, never even heard of, until I saw my own name on his fabricated evaluation being shared across neighborhood Facebook. I read it 3 times, checked the date. July 28th. 4 days ago. A day I'd spent in my garage organizing evidence files, completely unaware someone was writing a medical report about examining me. I'd never met this man. Never scheduled an appointment. Never sat in any doctor's office answering cognitive assessment questions. Never signed consent forms for psychological evaluation. But here was official letterhead, professional language, specific diagnoses, clinical recommendations. My name, my age, my address, completely fabricated. They'd invented a doctor, created medical records from nothing, weaponized healthcare documentation itself to make me look incompetent to anyone who didn't know the truth. My phone started ringing. Friends, neighbors, church members who'd seen the post, all concerned, all asking if I needed help, all believing the narrative Corinne had built. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Have you thought about moving to assisted living? It's nothing to be ashamed of. We all get older. Each call was a nail. Each expression of sympathy was evidence of how completely she dismantled my reputation while I watched helpless to stop people from believing a daughter's worry over a father's denial. They can forge wills. They can buy lawyers. They can invent doctors and flood Facebook with lies. But here's what they can't do. Rewrite 35 years of my hands fixing broken systems, learning to tell the difference between natural failure and deliberate sabotage. I sat in my living room with the fake evaluation pulled up on my laptop, reading diagnoses I didn't have from a doctor I'd never met, signed by an attorney I'd trusted for 15 years, who was now demanding I prove my own sanity. They'd bought a lawyer. They'd invented a doctor. They'd weaponized every system meant to protect the elderly against me. But they'd made one fundamental miscalculation. They assumed 70 years old meant broken, helpless, unable to fight back. Assumed I'd accept their narrative, their paperwork, their systematic dismantling of my autonomy. They'd forgotten I spent 35 years learning to diagnose sabotaged systems, learning to document failures, learning to prove the difference between accident and intention. And I knew exactly what came next. I needed real documentation from real doctors who actually knew me. I needed to build a case, not just proving Corinne tried to kill me, but proving I was competent, sharp, and exactly the wrong person to underestimate. If they wanted to paint me as senile and incompetent, I'd get real documentation from a real doctor who'd actually treated me for 10 years, and I'd make damn sure every piece of counter-evidence was documented, dated, and legally impossible to forge or dismiss. Mid-August, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Conrad Ramsey, my cardiologist of 10 years, and a 62-year-old physician who knew my medical history better than I did. I'd been seeing him quarterly since the arrhythmia diagnosis. His office smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. When they called my name, I carried a folder containing the fake evaluation into the exam room. "Lowell," Dr. Ramsey said, shaking my hand. "What brings you in?" I need comprehensive cognitive evaluation," I said. "Legal competency certification, and official documentation that my prescribed medication was stolen. A fake doctor claims I'm incompetent. I need real proof I'm not." I handed him the fake evaluation. Watched his expression shift from confusion to professional anger. "Lowell, you've been my patient for 10 years, he said. "Your mind is as sharp as when we first met. Let's document that officially and shut down whoever's making these claims." He administered the mini mental state exam right there. Orientation, registration, recall, attention, calculation, language. Standard cognitive screening. I scored 30 out of 30. Perfect. Dr. Ramsey signed the competency certification without hesitation, printed on official letterhead, dated and stamped with his medical license number. Then he turned to his computer. "This Dr. Quentin Hartwell you mentioned," he said, typing. "I'm checking Oregon Medical Licensing Database." He frowned at the screen, typed again. "Searched different databases. I can't find him," Dr. Ramsey said. "Not in Oregon, not in Washington, not in the National Physician Registry. That's not just irregular, that's potentially fraudulent. I'll flag this with the state medical board." The twist transformed my defense into offense. Not just proving competence, but actively exposing the fake doctor conspiracy from inside the medical system itself. I showed Dr. Ramsey my medication log documenting 6 missing pills. He officially recorded the theft in my medical file, noting the missing medication matched the quantity that had poisoned my son-in-law. "If someone's using your prescribed medication to hurt people," Dr. Ramsey said, "that's attempted murder with a paper trail." I left with 3 certified documents: perfect cognitive evaluation, legal competency certification, and official theft report for controlled medication. Real documentation from a real doctor who'd actually examined me. Late August, I climbed into my attic looking for old tax documents. Found boxes Eleanor had packed before she died, labeled in her handwriting. One box was marked personal. Inside were journals, leather-bound notebooks she'd kept for decades. I'd known she journaled, never read them. They felt private, sacred. But now I needed to understand how Corinne had become capable of this. I opened the last journal dated 2017, the year Eleanor died. I worry about Corinne, not because she's bad, but because she's always believed she wasn't loved enough. Even though we tried our best, gave everything we had, I flipped back. Found entries from when Corinne was younger. Corinne asked today why Dad is rarely home. I don't know how to explain the night shifts Lowell worked to pay for her school. She doesn't understand, and I don't have the courage to explain it the right way. Another entry from when Corinne was 22. She measures everything in money now. Success, love, worth. I worry we created this somehow, but I don't know how to fix it. Eleanor knew. Somehow, 6 years dead and buried, my wife had seen this fracture forming in our daughter, seen the misunderstanding metastasizing into resentment, while I was too busy working night shifts to notice until it was far too late to fix. I sat in the attic darkness, understanding that my daughter's attempt to murder me had roots going back decades. All those night shifts to give her a future, and she'd interpreted everyone as abandonment. Every hour in crawl spaces to pay her college tuition, she'd counted as proof I didn't love her enough, and Eleanor had seen it happening. Had tried to explain, hadn't known how to bridge the gap. Now that gap had widened into attempted murder, forged wills, and conspiracy to steal everything we'd built. Early September. A Tuesday morning, my phone rang with an unfamiliar area code. To Mr. Blanchard. A woman's voice, professional and measured. Detective Ilsa Gallagher, Oregon State Police. We arrested loan shark Rufus Callahan in racketeering case last week. His phone has text messages from your daughter Corinne that deeply concern us. I set down my coffee. What kind of messages? The messages explicitly reference, quote, "The old man dies first, then help me toss the husband out." They discuss significant debt and what appears to be conspiracy planning. Mr. Blanchard, do you have any idea what your daughter meant by that? Detective Ilsa Gallagher of the Oregon State Police, 47 years old, with the kind of professional voice that comes from delivering serious news to families too many times, was calling about text messages that would change everything. Rufus Callahan, a 44-year-old loan shark arrested in an unrelated racketeering case, had been careless enough to keep text messages from Corinne explicitly planning my death, evidence he never knew would end up in police hands. Sometimes a broken system fixes itself from a direction you never planned for, not because you engineered it perfectly, but because criminals get careless, and the universe has a way of shorting out faulty wiring when the pressure builds too high. I said. I have quite a bit to tell you and documentation to back up every word. When can we meet in person? How's tomorrow morning? She asked. Oregon State Police Headquarters, downtown Portland. I'll be there. I set the phone down and stared out the kitchen window at morning light filtering through oak trees. For weeks, I'd fought alone, gathering evidence, building files, documenting everything, while my daughter dismantled my reputation. And then, a loan shark I'd never heard of got arrested in a completely unrelated case, and his confiscated phone handed police text messages, proving every suspicion I'd documented. Justice doesn't always come from the direction you expect. Sometimes it comes from criminals being careless, and systems exposing their own faults under pressure. Now I just needed to present everything to Detective Gallagher in a way she couldn't ignore. 2 days later, I walked into Oregon State Police Headquarters, carrying a banker's box full of evidence organized exactly like an HVAC system diagnostic report. Every component labeled, every failure point, documented, every piece of deliberate sabotage proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The building smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Security scanned my ID, directed me to the 3rd floor. Detective Gallagher met me at the elevator, professional handshake, eyes that had seen too much to be shocked easily. Mr. Blanchard, she said. This way. She led me to an interview room with a metal table, recording equipment mounted on the wall, no windows. The kind of room where serious conversations happened and got documented for court. I set the banker's box on the table. I organized everything chronologically, I said. I'm an HVAC mechanic. When a system fails catastrophically, you diagnose every component. This is my daughter's conspiracy, diagnosed piece by piece with sources and dates. Detective Gallagher pulled out a legal pad, hit record on the equipment. Walk me through it, she said. I started with the birthday dinner, the pasta plate. The moment my instinct screamed danger, showed her the first USB drive recovered security footage from July 1st. Corinne entering my house, opening the medicine cabinet, stealing the orange prescription bottle, crushing pills into powder. 4 minutes and 32 seconds, I said. Documented proof she stole my prescribed digoxin to poison me with. Next came the forged will. I walked her through the signature analysis, showed her the missing tremor from my 2018 hand injury, explained how the document had been dated April 15th, while my real house deed was missing from the safe. Then the purple USB drive Freya had given me. The real estate contract showing Corinne had sold my property on May 15th for $1.5 million contingent on transfer before January 1st, 2024. She sold my house 2 months before trying to kill me, I said. The murder wasn't the plan. It was cleanup, deadline enforcement. Detective Gallagher took notes, silent and focused. I showed her Dr. Ramsey's cognitive evaluation, perfect MMSE score, legal competency certification, medical documentation of the stolen medication. Then the fake evaluation from Dr. Quentin Hartwell declaring me incompetent. I've never met this doctor, I said. Never been examined by him. Dr. Ramsey checked. Hartwell doesn't exist in Oregon medical licensing databases. Finally, the handwritten timeline connecting everything. July birthday party. Donovan poisoned. Hospital diagnosis. Discovered evidence. Sterling Ashford's suspicious questions. The Facebook smear campaign. Rufus Callahan's text messages. Detective Gallagher reviewed everything for 10 minutes. Didn't interrupt. Took detailed notes. Cross-referenced dates. Then she looked up. Mr. Blanchard, you've documented this more thoroughly than most professional investigators I've worked with, she said. We'll verify everything independently, but this is exceptional work. You've already done our job. If you've ever had to translate 35 years of professional instinct into language, someone who's never held a wrench can understand, this specific pressure making people who weren't there believe what you saw the moment your daughter's smile turned predatory. The validation hit harder than I'd expected. For months, I'd been the only one who knew, the only one who believed. Everyone else saw a worried daughter and a confused elderly man. Now a detective was telling me I'd built a prosecutable case. I'm opening an official criminal investigation, Detective Gallagher said. Attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud, forgery. We'll bring in forensics for the video authentication, handwriting analysis for the will medical board investigation for this fake doctor. We'll interview your son-in-law, Donovan, subpoena Sterling Ashford's client files, trace the real estate transaction. She paused, checking her notes. The guardianship hearing is scheduled February 15th, 2024, she said. Unfortunately, we can't stop it. The petition's already filed, the courts involved. That's a civil matter separate from our criminal investigation. My chest tightened. So she can still win guardianship. Legally, yes, the hearing will proceed, Detective Gallagher said. But here's our strategy. We use that date as our deadline. We have 5 months to build a criminal case so comprehensively documented that by February 15th we can present evidence to the probate judge showing exactly who's really incompetent here. Criminal investigation findings are admissible in guardianship hearings. If we can prove she tried to murder you, forged documents, paid a fake doctor, no judge will grant her guardianship. Sometimes the difference between justice and injustice is just timing, whether the system catches the sabotaged component before the whole structure collapses into catastrophic failure, or whether it shows up afterward to investigate the rubble and count the bodies. We had 5 months. February 15th, 2024. The same deadline Corinne had committed to in the real estate contract. The same date the guardianship hearing would determine if she could legally take everything I'd built. We'll coordinate with the medical board on Hartwell, Detective Gallagher continued. Run financial forensics on the property sale. Interview witnesses. Document everything for both criminal prosecution and civil defense. This is going to take time to do right, but we have enough here to start. What about Corinne? I asked. Will you arrest her? Not yet, Detective Gallagher said. We need the case airtight before we move. Right now, she thinks she's winning. Let her think that. People get sloppy when they're confident. They make mistakes, leave trails. We'll watch document build. When we arrest her, it'll be with charges she can't talk her way out of. She stood, extended her hand. Patience is our best tool now, she said. I know that's hard when it's your life on the line. But we do this right or we don't do it at all. I shook her hand, picked up my banker's box, now evidence in an active investigation, walked out of Oregon State Police headquarters into September afternoon sunlight. I walked out with my banker's box lighter, but my chest heavier with the weight of a deadline. February 15th, 2024. 5 months away. In 5 months. Either I'd prove my daughter tried to poison me and systematically dismantled my life for real estate profit, or she'd win guardianship, take my house, and finish what the pasta couldn't. Detective Gallagher said patience was our best tool now, building the criminal case brick by documented brick until it was legally unbreakable. I knew about patience. 35 years repairing broken systems one component at a time taught me that. 5 months was enough time if nothing else went catastrophically wrong. The investigation results started arriving 2 weeks later, and every single one of them proved exactly what I'd known. From the beginning, they'd built an entire fraud infrastructure to paint me incompetent, but they'd gotten sloppy because they assumed 70 years old meant no one would bother checking. Late September, Detective Gallagher called with the Oregon Medical Board results. We've got him, she said without preamble. Dr. Quentin Hartwell, Oregon Medical Board confirmed 0 active licenses anywhere in Oregon. Never had one. But it gets better. California revoked his medical license in 2021. I sat down at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear. We're revoked for what? I asked, though I already suspected. The fraud, Detective Gallagher said. Falsifying patient records, insurance scams, multiple complaints. State Medical Board investigation found he'd been creating fake diagnoses, billing for treatments never performed, selling disability certifications to people who didn't qualify. They pulled his license permanently. He's been operating illegally for over 2 years. The entry twist hit like a compressor failure. Corinne hadn't accidentally hired a questionable doctor. She'd deliberately sought out a known medical fraudster with proven history of forging official healthcare documents for money. We traced the payment, Detective Gallagher continued. $8,000 cash withdrawn from Corinne's account, August 3rd. 3 days later, Hartwell's evaluation declaring you incompetent goes viral on Facebook and gets filed with probate court. The timing's documented. The money trail's documented. We've got both of them on conspiracy to commit fraud. I thought about that evaluation. The professional letterhead, the clinical language, the specific diagnoses, all purchased from a man who'd already lost his medical license for doing exactly this. She didn't just buy a fake evaluation, I said quietly. She specifically found a fraudster with history of forging medical documents. She knew exactly what she was doing. That's what makes it prosecutable, Detective Gallagher said. This wasn't desperation or confusion. This was calculated fraud with a documented financial transaction. We're preparing criminal charges against both Hartwell and your daughter. The guardianship petition's foundation is crumbling. They say fraud only works when victims don't fight back, when they're too confused, too ashamed, too isolated to verify the lies being told about them. Corinne counted on me being all three. She counted wrong. Early October, Detective Gallagher subpoenaed hospital records from Providence Portland Medical Center. Not just Donovan's treatment records from July, all documentation related to my visits during his admission. The hospital's compliance department ran a routine forensic audit before releasing the files. That's when they found the tampering. Margaret Fielding, Providence, Portland, Medical Center's Records Compliance Administrator in her mid-50s with 30 years of healthcare documentation experience, called Detective Gallagher directly instead of releasing the subpoenaed records. "Detective, we've found irregularities," she said in the conference call they put me on. "These nursing notes show post-admission alteration. Digital signatures don't match timestamps. Someone changed these 8 days after the patient was discharged." "What exactly was changed?" Detective Gallagher asked. "Observations about the patient's father visiting the night of admission," Fielding said. "I could hear her typing, pulling up files. Original logged notes, time-stamped July 12, 2023, 10:47 p.m. Patient's father. Coherent appropriate affect, asked relevant questions about son's condition, expressed appropriate concern." Then on July 20th, 8 days later, same timestamp, different author code. Patient's father appeared. Confused, disoriented to time and place, repeated questions multiple times, memory deficits observed. "Someone went back and changed the nursing notes," I said. "Not just changed," Fielding said. "Professionally altered. Kept the original timestamp to make it look contemporaneous. Changed the author code to a generic system admin account. If we weren't running forensic audit software, we wouldn't have caught it. The alterations are logged in our backup servers with modification dates, IP addresses, user credentials." Detective Gallagher's voice went hard. "Who had access to make those changes?" "That's what concerns me," Fielding said. "This level of access requires administrative privileges. Someone either works in our IT department or convinced someone who does to alter official medical records. That's beyond fraud, that's criminal tampering with healthcare documentation. When you're diagnosing a failed heating system and find one deliberately cut wire, you check the entire circuit board because sabotage is never isolated. It's always a coordinated pattern designed to look like random malfunction until someone who knows what they're looking at starts tracing connections. Dr. Conrad Ramsey, when contacted by Detective Gallagher, immediately provided counter-documentation. His office notes from my quarterly checkups showed consistent cognitive function, appropriate responses, no confusion or disorientation. His records directly contradicted the altered hospital notes. Providence, Portland launched an internal investigation. Security reviewed employee access logs. IT department checked for unauthorized credential use. The hospital's legal team started coordinating with Detective Gallagher. The conspiracy hadn't just bought a fraudulent doctor and corrupted my attorney. They'd infiltrated the hospital's medical record system, changing official documentation courts would accept as gospel truth about my mental state. "Ugh, this is bigger than we thought," Detective Gallagher said when we met at her office to review the findings. "We're not just looking at your daughter anymore. Someone with hospital system access helped her. That's conspiracy involving healthcare fraud, tampering with official records, possibly identity theft if they used someone else's credentials." She spread the forensic audit reports across her desk. Digital timestamps, modification logs, IP addresses, author codes. They were systematic, she said. Fake doctor evaluation for public consumption, altered hospital records for court documentation, corrupt attorney for legal maneuvering, real estate contract for financial motive. They built a complete fraud infrastructure. "But they got sloppy," I said. "They assumed no one would check." Detective Gallagher agreed. "Assumed 70 years old meant you wouldn't know how to verify digital records, wouldn't understand forensic audits, wouldn't fight back hard enough to make us look this deep." I sat in that hospital records office staring at the digital forensic audit showing exactly when someone altered the nursing notes about me. July 20th, 8 days after Donovan's admission, right when Corinne would have realized the poisoning failed and needed backup documentation for Plan B. They'd bought a fraudulent doctor with history of forging records. They'd corrupted my attorney of 15 years. And now they'd infiltrated hospital medical records, changing official documentation courts would accept as truth. They were systematically painting a picture of a senile old man who couldn't be trusted with his own life. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I spent 35 years reading things hidden inside walls, diagnosing tampering. Others missed catching the alterations nobody else bothered to look for. And digital forensics, unlike people, don't lie when you know how to read them. The new lawyer slid the document across his desk, and I saw Sterling Ashford's signature next to a number that made my hands shake. 8% equity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'd driven to Theron Whitfield's office that October afternoon, carrying everything I'd built: camera footage forged, Will Purple USB hospital records, Detective Gallagher's findings. The office occupied a mid-rise on Commerce Street, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor, steel and dark wood instead of Sterling's old-money mahogany. A receptionist directed me to the conference room. I set my evidence file on the table. Theron Whitfield was nothing like Sterling Ashford, 30 years younger in energy, if not in years, with wire-rimmed glasses and a prosecutor's intensity that made me sit straighter in my chair. "Mr. Blanchard," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've been following your case since that Oregonian article about your daughter's Alzheimer's claims." "You read about it?" I asked. "I did. I spent 12 years as a federal prosecutor dismantling financial fraud schemes. When I see elder exploitation patterns, I pay attention." He sat across from me. "I'm taking your case pro bono, no fee. What your daughter's doing is exactly the systematic fraud I prosecuted for over a decade. For the first time since Freya handed me that purple USB drive, I felt something close to hope." I walked Theron through everything chronologically. Birthday dinner, swapped pasta plate, Donovan's poisoning, forged will, camera footage of Corinne stealing my medication, the purple USB showing she'd sold my house 2 months before trying to kill me, Sterling's suspicious questions, fake Dr. Hartwell evaluation, hospital records tampering. Theron took detailed notes, asked sharp questions about chain of custody timestamps, digital metadata. "You've documented this exceptionally well," he said. "Most victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late. You caught it early and preserved evidence." He pulled out the purple USB contract, read it once, then again. His fingers tapped against the pages. I watched his expression shift, concentration turning to visible anger. He typed on his laptop, cross-referencing the contract against Oregon State Bar ethics codes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Theron, I could see the Portland skyline lit up against the October dusk. Buildings I'd spent 35 years keeping cool, crawling through their duct systems like arteries keeping the blood flowing. Now I needed someone to do the same for me. Find the blockage, clear the system, restore the flow. Theron looked up from his laptop. "Let me explain the legal framework," he said, standing to use the whiteboard. "We're looking at multiple criminal charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud, forgery. Your evidence chain supports all of them." He diagrammed it out, mapping evidence to Oregon Revised Statute sections. Detective Gallagher's investigation builds the criminal case parallel to the guardianship hearing scheduled for February 15, 2024. Theron continued. "We can't stop that hearing, but we can present criminal investigation findings to the probate judge. If we prove your daughter tried to murder you, no judge will grant her guardianship." He circled a date on the whiteboard. February 15, 2024. "That's our deadline," he said. 5 months to make this case unbreakable. Before I tell you what Theron found in that contract, comment A, if you think my attorney Sterling was in on it from the beginning, or B, if he got pulled in later. Quick note: what follows includes some fictionalized details added for storytelling, but the core lesson about trust and betrayal is what matters. Theron set down his marker and picked up the purple USB contract again. Slid it across the desk toward me, his finger pointing to a section I'd missed. "Look at the signature block," he said quietly. "Legal representative for seller. Sterling Ashford, attorney at law." I'd seen that. Sterling was listed as Corinne's attorney on the contract. "Now look at this," Theron said, pointing to another section. "Equity stakeholders. Page 17. I flipped to page 17. Sterling Ashford's signature appeared again. Next to it, 8% equity stake in property liquidation proceeds. 8% of $1.5 million. $120,000. Sterling Ashford purchased an 8% equity stake in the property sale. Theron said, his voice hard. "Your attorney, the man you trusted for 15 years, bought into the deal. He has direct financial interest in seeing you declared incompetent, so your daughter inherits and liquidates the house he can then profit from." The air conditioning hummed. Outside traffic moved through downtown Portland. Everything normal. Everything wrong. "This isn't just malpractice," Theron continued. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder. Sterling violated every ethics rule in the Oregon State Bar. Lawyers cannot have financial interests adverse to their clients. He could be disbarred. He should be criminally charged. My wife would have loved this moment, not the betrayal, but the clarity. She always said that the worst problems were the ones you couldn't see, the slow leaks that rotted the infrastructure from inside. Now we could see it. Now we could fix it." "What do we do?" I asked. Theron turned to a fresh whiteboard page. "First, we file a bar complaint against Sterling Ashford," he said. "Document the conflict of interest, the equity stake, the fiduciary violation. Second, we share this with Detective Gallagher. Sterling gets added to the criminal investigation. Third, we prepare an amended civil lawsuit naming Sterling as defendant. Fourth, we coordinate with the district attorney about criminal charges." He drew arrows connecting each action. "We're going to dismantle this conspiracy piece by piece," Theron said, "methodically, completely. By February 15th, your daughter and her co-conspirators won't just lose the guardianship petition, they'll be facing criminal prosecution." "When do we start?" I asked. "We already have," Theron said. I walked out of his office into October evening air, carrying my evidence file, and something I hadn't felt in months: momentum. 3 months ago, my daughter had tried to poison me at my birthday dinner. Now I had proof of the entire conspiracy, including my own attorney's $120,000 profit motive. I looked back at Theron's lit office window, then drove home through downtown Portland, with determination replacing the despair that had weighed on me since July. The system was finally working. The blockage was clearing, and I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My wife's handwriting hadn't changed in 30 years, but the words on the page made me feel like I'd never known her or our daughter at all. The journal sat open on my workbench, Eleanor's looping script filling page after page. I'd found it weeks ago while searching for evidence tucked behind her gardening books, where I never looked. Most entries were mundane grocery lists, garden plans, observations about the neighborhood. But this one, dated November 12th, 1995, stopped me cold. Corinne asked me today why Daddy doesn't love us enough to stay home. She's 7 years old, and she's measuring love in hours instead of sacrifice. I tried to explain that he works night shifts, so we can keep this house so she can have dance lessons and new shoes. But she just stared at me with those serious eyes and said, "Money isn't the same as being here." I don't know how to make her understand that sometimes love looks like absence. I read it 3 times each pass, tightening the knot in my chest. All those years, I'd thought I was building something for them. A foundation, security. The house Corinne now wanted to steal had been bought with those night shifts she'd resented. The HVAC systems I'd installed across the city had paid for her college, her first car, her wedding to that waste of space she'd divorced. But somewhere along the way, the wires had crossed. The circuit that should have connected provision with love had been miswired in her 7-year-old mind, and 30 years of compounding misunderstanding had turned my daughter into someone capable of poisoning her own father. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. Understanding her didn't mean forgiving her. It just meant the betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. 2 weeks later, I met Donovan at Riverside Park. He'd called that morning voice tight with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you're in over your head. I found him on a bench near the fountain, hunched in a jacket too thin for early November. "She doesn't know I'm here," he said before I even sat down. I settled beside him, watching a kid throw bread to the ducks. "Detective Gallagher give you a choice. Testify against her, or go down as an accessory to attempted murder." He rubbed his face. "Some choice." "What are you going to do?" He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I loved her. Maybe I still do. But I'm not dying in prison for something she planned before I even knew her name. So you'll testify?" "Yeah." He turned to look at me, and I saw the same exhaustion I felt every morning. "For what it's worth, I didn't know about the digoxin. I thought we were just going to scare you into signing. She told me you'd had a dizzy spell, that you were confused, that we needed to act fast before you did something stupid. I didn't know she'd poisoned you until Detective Gallagher showed me the tox screen. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I even did. But belief didn't change the fact that he'd stood in my kitchen and watched her forge documents, that he'd driven her to Sterling's office to fake an evaluation, that he'd been complicit in every step except the one that could have killed me. "Testify," I said. "Tell the truth. It's the only thing that might save you." He nodded and left without another word. Mid-November brought Freya to my door, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red from crying. Her mother had told her something, probably a sanitized version, that painted me as the villain. I made hot chocolate the way Eleanor used to, with real cocoa and a touch of cinnamon, and we sat at the kitchen table. "Grandpa, why is Mom saying you're trying to hurt her?" I measured my words like I'd once measured refrigerant too much or too little, and the whole system fails. "Your mom made some choices that broke the law. I'm not trying to hurt her. I'm trying to stop her from hurting me, but she's your daughter. She is, and I love her. But love doesn't mean letting someone poison you and steal your house." Freya's face crumpled. "She wouldn't." "She did." I slid the hospital report across the table, the one that showed digoxin levels 3 times normal. "I'm not asking you to stop loving your mother. I'm asking you to understand that loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences." She stared at the report, too young to fully understand the numbers, but old enough to recognize what they meant. When she looked up, her eyes held a question I wasn't sure I could answer. "How do you know when to stop protecting someone?" I thought about Eleanor's journal about 7-year-old Corinne measuring love in hours, about 30 years of crossed wires that had led us here. When protecting them means betraying yourself. When their choices become your chains. When love turns into complicity. Freya nodded slowly, and I saw something shift behind her eyes, understanding maybe, or the beginning of it. She finished her hot chocolate in silence, then stood to leave. "I'll remember this," she said at the door. "When I'm grown up, I'll remember what you said." I watched her walk down the driveway, 12 years old and carrying weight no kid should have to carry. One conversation against 30 years of misaligned understanding. One afternoon against a lifetime of measuring love in all the wrong currencies. I wondered if it would be enough. I circled February 15, 2024 on the kitchen calendar, with red marker, the day I'd either save my house or lose everything my wife and I built in 30 years. 3 months had passed since Freya walked down my driveway carrying the weight of understanding. 3 months of wondering if one conversation would hold when her mother faced consequences. I stopped wondering on November 27th when Theron Whitfield called. Detective Gallagher has enough to arrest Corinne today, Theron said, voice carrying strategic calm. But if we move now, she might flee. We wait until after the hearing, let her think she's safe. I gripped the phone tighter. 18 more days of her walking free, knowing what she tried to do. She took 18 days to let her dig deeper. Every move she makes now adds to our case. She's posting on social media about caring for elderly parents. Let her build that narrative, it plays straight into prosecution hands when the jury sees what her care actually looked like. The strategy settled in my chest, like ice. Police turning Corinne's false confidence into a trap. Strategic, calculated. Everything I'd never been until July 15th forced me to learn. Day after the hearing, Theron continued. Win or lose the civil case, criminal charges hit before she leaves the courthouse steps. I agreed, because patience had kept me alive this long. 18 more days wouldn't kill me. The digoxin hadn't managed it. Time moved like refrigerant through a clogged line, slow, resistant building pressure. I tore calendar pages off one by one. December 1st, December 15th, January 1st. Each day another voicemail from Detective Gallagher, another update tightening the noose. Donovan's testimony locked in. He's cooperating fully. December 15th. Sterling Ashford's bar complaint hearing set for March. His 8% equity is now federal evidence. January 22. The evidence file grew thicker. Hospital records, security footage, Eleanor's journal, the forged will. The purple contract showing Sterling's $120,000 stake. 43 pieces of documentation, each one a nail I'd measured and placed with 40 years of precision. I reviewed it nightly at the kitchen table, the same table where Corinne had served pasta on July 15th, the same chairs where Donovan had sat before I switched our plates. 7 months compressed into manila folders and USB drives. Social media showed Corinne's performance. Photos at senior center volunteer events. Captions about cherishing elderly loved ones. I wondered if sympathy would survive evidence. February arrived cold, but not brutal winter without snow. Just gray skies and wind that found every gap in the window, seals the kind of cold that settled into walls and refused to leave. December 15th had hit me harder than the others. 31 years earlier, Eleanor and I had closed on this house. She'd stood in the empty living room afterward and said, "Houses aren't just assets, they're promises we make to the future." I'd thought she meant the rooms we'd fill. Now I understood she'd meant something deeper. This house was the promise that love could create security, that work could build legacy, that sacrifice meant something. 30 years keeping that promise. And now I was fighting to preserve it against the daughter we'd raised in those very rooms. The math was bitter. Provision had become property, protection had become poison, and the future we'd promised had arrived wearing my daughter's face. February 14th. I lay in bed listening to the furnace cycle, the system I'd installed in 1998. Tomorrow. 30 years of marriage, 7 months of investigation compressed into one hearing. February 15th, 2024, 6:00 a.m. I woke before the alarm. The evidence file sat ready on the kitchen table. I went through it one final time, camera footage, USB forged will with handwriting analysis. The purple contract showing Sterling's equity stake, hospital records, documenting digoxin levels 3 times normal, Eleanor's journal, Detective Gallagher's investigation summary. 43 pieces of evidence. 7 months of work. One hearing to decide if truth mattered more than blood. I looked at the cabinet where the pasta plates lived. July 15th. Donovan's plate instead of mine. The night I'd chosen survival over trust. If I lost today, Corinne got the house and walked free until criminal charges caught up. If I won, my daughter went to prison. There was no victory here, just survival. 7:30 a.m. 40 years. Maintaining HVAC systems had taught me one thing. Equipment works when every component does its job without compromise. Compressor, condenser, evaporator, expansion valve miss one, the whole system fails. Courts were the same. Evidence, testimony, law, judge, everything had to align perfectly. I'd done the maintenance work, documented every connection, checked every seal. Now I was trusting the system to run true. I pulled the Navy suit from the closet. Wife's funeral, spring 2017. It still fit despite 7 months of stress. I adjusted the tie in the mirror, same motion as before Eleanor's service, same knot I'd tied while Corinne waited downstairs. She'd delivered the eulogy that day. Promised to take care of Dad. Guess she kept that promise. Just not the way I'd expected. The wedding photo sat on the dresser. Eleanor and White, both of us young enough to believe promises held. We'd raised Corinne in this house, fed her, clothed her, paid for college with night shift money she'd resented, and she'd tried to poison me for the deed. 8:15 a.m. I picked up the evidence file and walked to the front door. The house sat silent behind me. Kitchen where I'd swapped plates. Bedroom with Eleanor's journal. Living room where Freya had learned that love doesn't mean complicity. 30 years of memories in walls that wouldn't care who owned them. I looked back one final time. The house didn't know yet if it was staying mine or becoming Corinne's. Either way, it wouldn't be home anymore. I stepped outside into February cold. The door clicked shut behind me and the house went silent, waiting to learn if it would stay mine or become my daughter's prize for trying to kill me. I carried 43 pieces of evidence in an accordion folder, 7 months of investigation, compressed into paper and digital files, walking toward a courtroom where blood would face truth and only one could win. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about refusing to let murder succeed, about standing witness, even when truth meant destroying my own daughter and losing my family forever. Survival or surrender. I'd chosen survival on July 15th when I swapped those plates. Everything since had just been following through. Multnomah County Probate Court opened its doors at 9 o'clock sharp, and Corinne smiled at me across the courtroom aisle, the same smile she'd worn at my birthday dinner 7 months ago when she served me the poisoned pasta. She sat at the petitioner's table with a polished woman in her 40s from a downtown firm hired to make the competency petition look legitimate. Corinne wore a modest gray dress, the costume of a concerned daughter. She thought she was going to win. 7 months of investigation, and she still believed her petition would succeed. Theron sat beside me, accordion folder of evidence ready. We'd gone over strategy 3 times. Let them present first. Let them commit to their story. Then dismantle it. Judge Marcus Everett entered from chambers, a granite-faced man in his early 60s who'd spent 30 years on the Multnomah County bench and had a reputation for cutting through legal theater to find truth underneath. He settled into his chair, adjusted his reading glasses, and surveyed the courtroom. This court will hear petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship in the matter of Corinne Blanchard versus Lowell Blanchard, Judge Everett said. Ms. Blanchard, your attorney, may present the petition. Corinne's lawyer stood. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Lowell Blanchard, age 70, is suffering from dangerous cognitive decline that has already resulted in serious harm. His son-in-law nearly died from medication errors last July. I watched her build the narrative. Declining memory. Confusion about medications. Dangerous living situation. She cited Dr. Quentin Hartwell's medical assessments, requested emergency conservatorship over the house and assets. Dr. Hartwell's comprehensive assessment documents clear cognitive impairment requiring supervised care. The lawyer continued, "We seek this conservatorship not to punish Mr. Blanchard, but to protect him. To protect him." The phrase hung in the air like a refrigerant leak, invisible, toxic, deadly. She was weaponizing care, turning concern into a legal cage. How does love become a weapon like this daughter seeking to imprison father for his own good? The house Eleanor and I bought to protect our family, now being used to destroy it. Justice systems built to shield the vulnerable wielded as attack vectors by the predator sitting 3 feet away, wearing a concerned expression. Judge Everett listened without expression, taking notes. When Corinne's lawyer finished, he looked up. "Mr. Whitfield, your response?" Theron stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Blanchard is not incompetent. He's a crime victim." He placed a document on the evidence table. Mini mental state examination administered October 2023. Score 30 out of 30. Perfect cognitive function. He added a second document. Written certification from Dr. Conrad Ramsey, board-certified cardiologist. Full mental and physical competency assessed January of this year. Judge Everett picked up both documents. "These assessments are contemporaneous with the alleged decline." "Yes, Your Honor. Every evaluation confirms full competency." Theron paused. "Which brings us to the foundation of the petitioner's case, Dr. Quentin Hartwell." I watched Corinne's smile falter. Dr. Hartwell's medical license was permanently revoked in California in 2021 for insurance fraud. He is not a licensed physician. Theron placed the revocation order on the evidence table. Furthermore, hospital digital forensics confirm his assessment documents were inserted into Providence Portland records without authorization. He was never credentialed at that facility. Judge Everett's expression hardened. "You're telling me the petitioner's primary medical evidence comes from an unlicensed practitioner?" "Yes, Your Honor. And the records were tampered with to create false medical history." The judge turned to look at Corinne. She'd stopped smiling. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Detective Ilsa Gallagher of the Oregon State Police," Theron said. Detective Gallagher took the witness stand, mid-40s, dark hair, pulled back practical blazer that said she'd come straight from the precinct. She was sworn in and sat with the calm professionalism of dozens of criminal testimonies. "Detective Gallagher, are you familiar with this case?" Theron asked. "Yes. Oregon State Police has an active investigation into attempted murder charges against Ms. Corinne Blanchard, dating from July 15, 2023. The courtroom went very still. "Can you summarize the investigation?" We have camera footage showing Ms. Blanchard stealing her father's digoxin medication. We have a forged will attempting to transfer Mr. Blanchard's property. We have financial records showing conspiracy involving attorney Sterling Ashford, who purchased an 8% equity stake in the anticipated property sale. And we have scheduled testimony from the poisoning victim, Ms. Blanchard's husband, Donovan. Detective, is the competency petition itself part of your investigation?" "Yes. We believe it's part of a broader conspiracy to defraud Mr. Blanchard after the attempted murder failed." I watched Corinne's hands begin to tremble on the table. Same hands that had stolen my medication, forged my wife's signature, served pasta laced with digoxin. Now those hands shook as 7 months of investigation compressed into 10 minutes of testimony. Her confident smile dissolving with each document Theron placed before the judge. Corinne's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This criminal investigation is outside the scope of a guardianship hearing." Judge Everett overruled with a wave. "If the petitioner's claims of incompetence are based on events now under criminal investigation, I need the full picture." He leaned forward, reading glasses catching the fluorescent lights. "And Counselor, I wasn't done yet." Judge Everett nodded at Theron to continue, and they wheeled Donovan into the courtroom. Corinne's face went white, her husband, the man who'd survived the pasta, meant for me, rolling toward the witness stand in the wheelchair his poisoning had earned him. 7 months of physical therapy had strengthened him enough to testify. but the wheelchair told the story his body would carry forever. He wore a dress shirt that hung loose on shoulders that used to fill it. He took the oath. "Mr. Prescott, can you explain why you're testifying from a wheelchair?" Theron asked. "I spent 3 days in intensive care last July after eating pasta my wife prepared." Donovan glanced at Corinne. "Digoxin poisoning, 90 milligrams. The cardiac damage was permanent. And whose dinner was that pasta originally intended for?" "I'm my father-in-law's. I switched our plates as a joke." His voice cracked. "I ate poison meant for Lowell." "Mr. Prescott, did you have any involvement in the guardianship petitions?" "I signed the papers. Corinne showed me Dr. Hartwell's diagnosis claimed her father had cognitive decline. I believed we were helping him." Donovan looked down. "Detective Gallagher showed me the medical board revocation order in September. That's when I understood I'd been part of a conspiracy I didn't know existed." "What changed your mind about testifying today?" Donovan pulled out a small digital recorder. "I recorded a phone conversation on August 5th, right before Rufus was arrested in September." Theron held it up for the judge. "Your Honor, audio evidence legally obtained and turned over to state police during their racketeering investigation." Judge Everett nodded. "Play it." The courtroom speakers crackled. Corinne's voice filled the silence. "Rufus, I need $85,000 against the house. It's worth $1.5 million. I'll own it outright by spring." A gravelly male voice responded. "Your dad's still breathing. That's a problem for collateral. He won't be by the time you need to collect. The guardianship hearing is February 15th. Theron stopped the playback. "Detective Gallagher, can you confirm the origin of this audio recording?" Detective Gallagher stood up from the gallery. "Yes, Your Honor. This recording was lawfully seized from Rufus Callahan's encrypted phone under a federal search warrant during his racketeering arrest. It was verified by state forensic audio experts." I watched Corinne stare at the table face drained of color. Donovan had married my daughter, not knowing she measured love in property value, that she'd inherited her father's house in her heart before the man was dead. Now he paid with permanent nerve damage from poisoning meant for someone else, victim and witness, bound together by an accidental plate swap. "Mr. Prescott, do you have anything else you'd like to say?" Theron asked. Donovan turned his wheelchair to face Corinne. "Look at me." She didn't move. "Look at me, Corinne. I nearly died because you put digoxin in your father's birthday dinner. You measured it. You mixed it. You served it." Her hands trembled. "We've been married 14 years. I loved you. And you almost killed me for a house you haven't inherited yet." His voice broke. "I would have given you anything. All you had to do was ask." The silence was absolute. "No further questions, Your Honor," Theron said. Donovan was wheeled out, and Theron approached the bench with final evidence. Exhibit J, reverse mortgage contract, showing Sterling Ashford with 8% equity stake, $120,000 personal profit motive. Judge Everett examined the document. Exhibit K, text messages documenting the $85,000 loan from Rufus Callahan, borrowed against property Ms. Blanchard doesn't yet own. She borrowed against her father's house while he was still alive. Judge Everett looked up sharply. "Yes, Your Honor. November 2023. That's when Corinne stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. You worked night shifts my entire childhood." Her voice cracked across the courtroom like breaking glass. "You were never there, birthdays, recitals, nothing. You care more about that house than you ever cared about me." "Ms. Blanchard, sit down," Judge Everett said. She ignored him. 40 years of night shifts. For what? So I could grow up without a father. I earned that property. I paid with every birthday you missed, every recital you skipped, every night I asked Mom why Daddy didn't love us. Her lawyer tried to pull her down. She shook him off. That house is mine. I already paid for it with a childhood without you. Mimmons Blanchard, control yourself, Judge Everett warned. But I finally understood. Corinne hadn't tried to kill me for money. She'd tried to kill me for absence. Every night shift I'd worked to pay her tuition had translated in her child's mind as abandonment. 40 years of providing read as 40 years of neglect, love lost in translation between an HVAC mechanic's exhausted hands and a daughter's empty birthday chairs, communication failure compounding over decades into attempted murder. Theron waited until Corinne sat, then approached the bench one final time. Your Honor, one last piece of evidence. He held up Eleanor's journal. Deceased wife's diary entry dated November 12, 1995. He read aloud. Corinne asked me today why Daddy doesn't love us enough to stay home. She's 7 years old, and she's measuring love in hours instead of sacrifice. I tried to explain that he works night shifts so we can keep this house, but she just stared at me and said, money isn't the same as being here. Theron turned the page. I don't know how to make her understand that sometimes love looks like absence. Corinne is starting to measure love in material things. I hope it doesn't break her. The mother saw this coming in 1995, Judge Everett asked quietly. 28 years before the attempted murder, Your Honor. Judge Everett placed the journal on the bench and removed his reading glasses. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Everyone understood now this wasn't simple greed-driven murder. It was a 40-year tragedy born from a child who measured love in presence instead of provision, and parents who never quite found the words to bridge that gap. The courtroom had processed the tragedy in silence. Understanding didn't erase what Corinne had done. It just made the doing worse. Judge Everett returned from lunch recess at 2 o'clock, and the courtroom stood, everyone knowing the next 5 minutes would either save my life or end it. Judge Everett took the bench, adjusted his reading glasses, and reviewed his notes one final time. Corinne sat rigid beside her attorney, hands flat on the table. Theron sat calm beside me, evidence folder closed. The work was done. Now we waited for the system to run its course. This court is back in session, Judge Everett said. I'm prepared to deliver my ruling on the emergency guardianship petition. The courtroom held its breath. I've reviewed all evidence, testimony, and exhibits presented this morning. He looked down at his notes. 43 pieces of documentation, medical assessments, police investigation, recorded conversations, and testimony from the alleged victim. 43 pieces of evidence, 7 months of investigation, all compressed into whatever he said next. The petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship is dismissed in its entirety. Judge Everett's voice was measured final. Mr. Blanchard has demonstrated full cognitive competency through multiple independent evaluations. All assets, including the property at issue, remain under Mr. Blanchard's sole legal control. The house was mine. Legally, finally, completely. Furthermore, Judge Everett continued, the evidence suggests this petition was filed not to protect Mr. Blanchard, but to facilitate criminal activity against him. I felt Theron's hand on my shoulder. Relief without triumph. Safety without joy. Judge Everett wasn't finished. The deceased wife's journal reveals a tragic family dynamic, a child who misunderstood her father's sacrifice as abandonment. That tragedy deserves acknowledgement. Parents and children fail to communicate across gaps neither side fully understands. This court recognizes that pain. He paused, removing his glasses. But understanding how someone becomes capable of murder doesn't make the murder attempt acceptable. Compassion for origins doesn't negate accountability for actions. Ms. Blanchard attempted to poison her father. She fabricated medical evidence. She conspired with licensed professionals to defraud this court. These are criminal acts regardless of psychological origin. The courtroom doors opened. Detective Ilsa Gallagher entered with two uniformed officers, their footsteps echoing on the tile floor. She approached the bench, arrest warrant in hand. "Your Honor," Detective Gallagher said, "Oregon State Police has a warrant for Ms. Corinne Blanchard's arrest." Judge Everett nodded. "Proceed, Detective." Detective Gallagher walked toward Corinne, and I watched my daughter's face go pale. "Corinne Blanchard, you're under arrest for attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, elder abuse, and forgery." Corinne stood. Her attorney whispered something. She shook her head. The officer moved behind her, pulling her hands back. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound like a door closing, final, irreversible, the mechanism engaging exactly as designed. I watched Detective Gallagher handcuff my daughter in the courtroom, where I'd just saved my own life. Same hands I'd taught to ride a bicycle now cuffed behind her back. Same hands that had stolen my medication, forged my wife's signature, served poisoned pasta. Victory tasted like a funeral. The house was secured, but the family was destroyed. Justice served cold and final, exactly as ordered. "How you have the right to remain silent," the officer read. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Corinne didn't look at me as they led her toward the doors. 7 months fighting to expose her, and she wouldn't even look at me as they took her away. Her gray dress, the costume of a concerned daughter, wrinkled from hours sitting in court. Her hands cuffed, her face blank. "You won, Lowell," Theron said quietly. "The house is yours. You're safe." Safe. The word felt hollow. The courtroom doors closed behind my daughter, and the observers began filing out, murmuring to each other about what they'd witnessed. A father who'd survived his daughter's murder attempt. A daughter who'd tried to poison him for a house. A 40-year tragedy compressed into one afternoon's testimony. I gathered my accordion folder and walked out into February sunshine that felt too bright for what had just happened. 10 days passed. I returned to quiet routines. HVAC maintenance calls, grocery shopping, empty house, no celebration, no relief, just survival. The news reported Corinne held without bail pending trial. Donovan filed for divorce. Freya stayed with his parents and didn't return my calls. The house was mine, legally, finally, completely mine. But it had never felt emptier. Every room echoed with what used to be there. Eleanor's laugh in the kitchen. Corinne's childhood artwork still framed in the hallway. Freya's favorite chair in the living room. Victory was supposed to feel different than this. February 28th arrived cold and gray. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee, checking email out of habit. Subject line, or State Bar, disciplinary action. Sterling Ashford Bar. 847392. I opened it. License revoked, permanently effective February 27, 2024. Violations, conflict of interest, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial interest adverse to client. Additional civil proceedings pending from 14 former clients alleging malpractice. 40 years of practicing law gone in an email notification at 8 in the morning. No courtroom drama, no confrontation, no dramatic sentencing. Just bureaucratic consequence delivered while I sat in my kitchen staring at my wife's empty chair. Sterling Ashford had walked into my house 7 months ago with a fake evaluation and an 8% equity scheme. Now his career was over, his reputation destroyed, his law degree worthless. Civil lawsuits would strip whatever money he'd saved. The man who'd helped my daughter try to steal my house would spend years fighting to keep his own. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication, some kind of victory. I felt nothing. Justice happens through bureaucratic process. Now email notifications at 8 a.m. license revocations filed in triplicate arrest warrants processed through databases. No movie-ending catharsis. Just systems grinding consequences while survivors sit alone in empty kitchens drinking cold coffee that's gone bitter. I closed the laptop. The house was silent around me. My house, my property, my $1.5 million victory. I'd won everything and lost everyone. Justice sometimes is just an automated message in your inbox. Victory without satisfaction. Safety without family. The house secured, the daughter imprisoned, the attorney disbarred, the evidence vindicated. And me alone at the kitchen table where it all started, wondering what I was supposed to do with a house that no longer felt like home. 3 days after Sterling's disbarment email, I was still sitting in that kitchen, wondering what to do with a house that no longer felt like home. Then Donovan stood on my porch in late February with a duffel bag and a walking cane, looking 10 years older than the man who'd eaten poisoned pasta 7 months ago. He rang the bell. I opened the door. "I'm leaving Portland," Donovan said without preamble. "Moving to Austin to stay with my brother. Wanted to talk before I go." "You didn't have to come here." "Yes, I did." He leaned on the cane, favoring his left side, the way people do when nerve damage makes standing painful. The wheelchair from the courtroom had been temporary, but the cane was permanent. 7 months of physical therapy had gotten him this far. This was as far as he'd get. "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." He followed me to the kitchen, cane tapping against the hardwood Eleanor had insisted we install in 2003. Same floors, same table, same chairs where Corinne had served birthday pasta. This is where it happened, isn't it?" Donovan asked, lowering himself carefully into a chair. "The birthday dinner. Same table, same chairs, different everything else." I made coffee while he sat in silence. The kind Eleanor used to buy beans from the place on Mockingbird Lane. Some habits outlive the people who taught them. I set 2 mugs on the table and sat across from him. I signed those guardianship papers," Donovan said, voice flat. "Corinne showed me Dr. Hartwell's diagnosis, told me you were getting dangerous, confused. I believed her. I'm sorry, there's nothing else I can say that matters. You were her victim too, I know that. Doesn't change what I did." He stared into his coffee. "Lost my job when the poisoning story hit the news. Company didn't want the liability of an employee connected to attempted murder. Divorce filed last week. Plea deal keeps me out of prison but puts me on probation for 3 years. Where will you work? My brother manages a hardware store in Austin. Says he can find me something. Stockroom probably. Nothing that requires me to be on my feet too long." He touched the cane. "Cardiac damage limits what I can do now." We sat drinking coffee at the table where poisoned pasta had been served 7 months ago. Father nearly murdered for childhood absence. Husband nearly killed by accident. Both casualties of Corinne's 40-year resentment, both paying for love languages never translated properly between night shift HVAC work and empty birthday chairs. We were survivors of the same woman's choices, connected by the plate swap that saved my life and destroyed his health. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 men who'd been broken by the same person drinking coffee because there was nothing else to do. "Freya asks about you every day," Donovan said finally. "She misses you. I miss her too. Tell her I said that. I will." He finished his coffee and stood gripping the table for balance. "Take care of yourself, Lowell." We shook hands at the door, formal final. I watched him walk to his car, duffel bag in one hand, cane in the other, leaving Portland and 14 years of marriage behind. His taillights disappeared down the street. 2 days later, family court awarded Freya temporary custody to Donovan, with me designated secondary guardian. She was 12, old enough for the judge to consider her preferences. She chose to spend 1 week with me before moving to Austin. She arrived February 26th with a small suitcase and red eyes from crying. When court said, "I can stay with you for a week before we move to Austin," Freya said at the door. "Is that okay?" Of course it's okay. This is your home too. Will it always be, even when I'm in Austin? Always. We spent 3 days in careful routine. I made her breakfast. She did homework at the kitchen table. We watched old movies in the evening. Neither of us talked about Corinne or the trial or what came next. The third night, Freya pulled the purple USB from her pocket, the same one with the reverse mortgage contract that had broken the case open. "Grandpa, do you want this back?" She held it out. "It helped you write." I closed her hand around it. "You brought me that USB when no one else would tell the truth. You were 12 years old and braver than any adult in this mess. I'm still scared I did the wrong thing. She's my mom. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's what bravery is." I kept my hand over hers. "Keep the USB. Remember you did the right thing even when it was hard. That's more important than any house or any court case." She nodded, tears sliding down her face, and put the USB back in her pocket. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's journal. The house was quiet around me. The same silence that had felt empty when Donovan left now felt different. Freya slept upstairs. The purple USB sat on her nightstand. Something had shifted. I realized I'd misunderstood what the story meant. I'd thought it was about protecting the house, proving competency, winning the legal battle. But it wasn't. The story was about whether one purple USB, one kitchen conversation, one granddaughter brave enough to tell truth, could break cycles that journals predicted 28 years before they exploded into attempted murder. For the first time in 70 years, I bought a notebook and wrote a letter to my wife. "Scheites, you saw it coming in 1995, wrote it in your journal. I didn't believe a misunderstanding could compound for 28 years into murder. I was wrong." I wrote slowly, hand cramping from decades of holding wrenches instead of pens. "I can't fix what happened with Corinne. She tried to kill me for 40 years of night shifts I worked to give her a future. Understanding why doesn't change what she did. But Freya's different. She understood love and truth aren't opposites. Maybe that's enough." I paused, staring at the page. "I miss you. Should have said that more when you were here. Saying it now anyway." I folded the letter and placed it in Eleanor's journal box next to the 1995 entry where she'd predicted Corinne's trajectory 28 years before it ended in handcuffs. 2 generations of parents trying to understand the daughter who became a murderer, writing letters that would never be read except as evidence of how hard we tried and how completely we failed. But upstairs, Freya slept with a purple USB on her nightstand. Maybe that was the only resolution this story would ever have. That was February. March arrived with Freya on spring break from Austin, sleeping in the guest bedroom, purple USB still in her pocket. The house looked exactly the same as it did the morning of my 70th birthday. Same squeaky floorboards, same heating ducts I'd repaired. But I saw it completely differently now. I walked through it that first morning while she slept. Same physical structure. Kitchen table where poisoned pasta was served. Living room where I'd taught her that love and truth aren't opposites. Bedroom where Eleanor's journal documented a tragedy 28 years before it exploded. But the meaning had transformed. This wasn't a $1 million asset I'd defended against my daughter's greed. This was the place where Freya learned she had a grandfather who kept fighting. That mattered more than property value. Wife and I bought this house in December 1993 to build a family. Took 30 years and a murder attempt to understand what that actually meant. Freya came downstairs at 7:30 and made scrambled eggs. Burned them slightly, the edges crispy and dark. "I burned them a little. Sorry, Grandpa." I sat at the table where everything started. "Perfect eggs are overrated. These are fine." She set the plate in front of me, hesitating. "Mom used to make perfect eggs. Dad says I should stop trying to cook like her. You should cook like you, burned edges and all." We ate imperfect eggs together at the table where Corinne had served digoxin 7 months ago. Small, ordinary moment mattering more than any court victory. This was what I'd fought for, not the house itself, but the ability for my granddaughter to burn eggs in its kitchen and know she belonged here anyway. After breakfast, I sat in the living room while Freya did homework at the table. The house's meaning settled around me like morning light. Corinne tried to take this place because she thought it represented love withheld. Maybe she was right. But now it represented something different. When Freya visited from Austin, she knew this door opened. That's what the fight was actually about, not property, but permanence. 70 years old, living alone in a house that cost my family to keep. But my granddaughter had a place she could always come home to. That was victory, if victory looked like this. People assume 70 means vulnerable, declining, easy target. Society writes you off as someone whose best defenses are behind them, whose instincts have dulled with age. But 40 years as an HVAC mechanic taught me diagnostic instinct. When a system feels wrong, temperature dropping, pressure off, airflow restricted, you trust that feeling. You don't need a manual to know something's failing. You just know. That birthday dinner felt wrong. The timing. Corinne's insistence I eat quickly. Donovan's portion looking larger. I couldn't have explained why switching our plates mattered, but I did it anyway. Age didn't make me weak. Experience made me dangerous to underestimate. My daughter learned that the hardest way possible. That evening, I cooked pasta for dinner using Eleanor's recipe. Flour, water, eggs, salt. Same process as the birthday dinner 7 months ago. But this time, no conspiracy. No poison. Just a 70-year-old man making dinner in a kitchen where his daughter tried to kill him, choosing to cook anyway. Wife's pasta recipe, 2 cups flour, 3 eggs, pinch of salt. She made it every Sunday for 40 years. I'd watched her hands work the dough, fold it, cut it into strips. Now my hands did the same work, older but still capable. Last time I looked at pasta on a plate, I didn't know it could be a weapon. Now I knew, and I was still cooking it. Corinne couldn't take this from me, the ability to make dinner without fear, to use the kitchen table for meals instead of evidence sorting. Reclaiming ordinary rituals was its own kind of victory. I set the pasta on the same blue-rimmed plate from the birthday dinner. Studied it. Wife bought this at an estate sale in 1998. 26 years of dinners. 1 attempted murder. Countless ordinary meals. The plate didn't change, everything else did. Refusing to let one poisoning erase 1,000 safe memories. Tonight's pasta had nothing in it except flour, water, eggs, salt, and love. Sometimes that was enough. The doorbell rang. Freya came in from her afternoon walk carrying a library book about forensic science. I got this book from the library," she said, setting it on the table. "For school." "The school project." "Sort of." She sat across from me. "I wanted to understand how you figured it all out. How you knew. Instinct first, evidence second, documentation third, in that order." She opened the book, reading while I ate. Didn't take any pasta herself, just kept me company. Presence mattered more than words. She was processing trauma through science the way I'd processed it through evidence files. We were both trying to make sense of what couldn't be made sense of. If you're reading this, and you're 50 plus, understand this. Your instincts don't retire when you do. When something feels wrong, a relationship, a special dinner, a too convenient diagnosis, trust that feeling. Document everything compulsively. Save receipts. Record conversations. Take photos. Never underestimate what an old mechanic knows about how systems fail. Age is only a disadvantage if you believe the people trying to exploit you. I didn't. That's why I'm still here and my daughter is in prison awaiting trial. At 70 years old, I survived my daughter's attempt to murder me for a house worth $1.5 million. That sentence still doesn't sound real. The cost was everything. Daughter in prison, son-in-law divorced, granddaughter split between two cities, family destroyed, Sterling disbarred, Dr. Hartwell's fraud exposed, Donovan permanently damaged. Victory didn't feel victorious, but this house was still here. I was still here. Freya knew she had a safe place to return to a grandfather who chose truth over comfortable lies. A kitchen where burned eggs were acceptable and love wasn't measured in property value. I set my fork down and looked at the blue-rimmed plate. Served poison once. Served love 1,000 times. The plate was just a plate. Intention determined meaning. Freya sat across from me with her forensics book, processing what happened through scientific understanding. The purple USB was upstairs on her nightstand. Eleanor's journal was in its box with my letter folded inside. The house stood around us, secured at a cost I'd spend years calculating. Tonight's pasta had nothing in it except love. Sometimes at 70, survival is the only victory that matters. And somehow that's enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 40 years working night shifts to provide for my family, but I never stopped to make sure my daughter understood why I was absent. Don't make my mistake. Don't assume love translates automatically across generations. I thought the house I built would speak for itself. It didn't. Communication matters more than any property value, and I learned that lesson 7 months too late. When you're facing betrayal from family trust, your instincts the way I trusted mine that birthday night. Family justice doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like survival. Document everything. Save every text, every email, every receipt. These dad's revenge stories you hear aren't about vengeance. They're about refusing to let lies win. I believe God gives us the strength to stand up even when standing means losing everyone. Sometimes family justice means choosing truth over comfort, and that's the hardest choice any father can make. But it's the right one. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my position. These dad's revenge stories need to be heard because they remind us that age doesn't equal vulnerability. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to Wise Revenge for more stories about standing up when everything's against you, thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: while this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, the lessons about trust, documentation, and standing up for yourself are real. Take care of yourself out there.